Cold air gathers over Berlin in November 1989, and a steady murmur rises from streets that have known quiet obedience for too long. Along the line of concrete and floodlights, people move with purpose, yet keep their voices low, as if uncertain whether this evening is a rumor or a turning point. Notices about eased travel have circulated all afternoon, carried by word of mouth, clipped radio segments, and hurried notes from workplaces that shut early. The message sounds simple, though its meaning is not. Movement may be allowed. Crowds drift toward the checkpoints with small bags, warm coats, and cautious eyes. Guards consult telephones and folders. Senior offices remain vague. The mood feels part festival, part test. It is possible that nothing will change and the gates will close again. It is also possible that lines which for decades have felt immovable might soften. This program is a speculative reconstruction grounded in public records, press bulletins, and on-scene reporting available to the era. It does not claim final truth. It explores plausible motives, sequences, and human reactions by linking testimonies, an evening press statement, and border notes that may reflect confusion rather than intent. The goal is to map what seems visible from the street, hesitation at the top, insistence below, and a structure built to last now subject to noise, light, and the pressure of ordinary footsteps. If change happens tonight, it may happen not by plan but by accumulation. For now, the hour is late, the air is cold, and the lanes at the crossing points are filling with people who have waited long enough to know they might need to wait no more. The first handful to pass are not the boldest people in the city. They are ordinary workers, students, and pensioners who step as if the road might vanish under their shoes. On the other side of the barrier, a second table waits, meant to confirm identity and purpose. The staff there had expected forms and stamps. What they receive is a wave of relieved faces and questions about relatives, old streets, and a desire to look around. Process bends under the weight of volume. Verification becomes a glance at a document rather than audit of a dossier. People move in pairs and small groups that do not hold up the line. The first crossings are slow, then faster. A voice near the checkpoint calls out that the way appears open. The report is accurate and incomplete because open tonight means tolerated rather than formally authorized. A border log is started and filled with entries that read more like observations than rulings. Names are recorded where possible. Many pass too quickly for careful spelling. A second barrier, meant to control the exit lane, swings outward and stays that way. On the far curb, arrivals are met with restrained greetings that strengthen with each new step. West Side residents who live within walking distance have come down from apartments and pubs to meet whoever emerges. They offer spare change for a phone call, a flower, a handshake, and sometimes a lift to a nearby square. The air smells of cold stone and damp leaves. Laughter mixes with steady breathing, the sound of people who have walked a long way in heavy coats. Traffic slows as drivers pull over to watch. A small band sets up near a corner and plays familiar tunes that everyone can hum without instruction. It is not a planned concert. It is something that happens when relief needs room. Those arriving do not all linger. Some cross, look up and down the street as if confirming that the area exists as remembered, then turn to go back home, satisfied that the gate is no longer forbidden. Others head toward shops they have heard about for years, with no plan to buy much, only to see. They describe the lights as brighter, the windows larger, the streets wider, though the actual differences may be smaller than the stories imply. Expectation adds its own wattage. Meanwhile, the checkpoint staff attempt to keep a record. A supervisor looks down the lane and notices the crowd now stretching far beyond the first corner. He speaks with the frontline guards and points out the risk of a bottleneck. The decision, if it can be called that, is to stop resisting what cannot be contained without force that no one wishes to apply. The gate remains open. A second lane is improvised. The work of control becomes the work of safe passage. The meaning of authority shifts from refusal to guidance. News of this shift moves quickly, because it does not need official channels. It moves by payphone and by feet. People leave the line to knock on doors and tell neighbors. Those neighbors join and bring sandwiches wrapped in paper. An elderly couple arrives and receives help to the front, not because of policy, but because the crowd agrees on courtesy tonight. Across the city, similar scenes begin at other crossing points. Some open earlier, some later. The timing depends on how quickly each location reaches the same internal conclusion, that any attempt to close the gate again would now look both impractical and unwise. A local news bulletin summarizes the situation in plain language that recalls the evening's ambiguous statement, but adds a simple phrase, "Crossings are happening." That sentence performs the function of a stamp. People keep moving. A group of students climbs a low service ledge and peers toward the top of the structure itself. They talk about climbing it, not as a dare, but as a way to see the city as a whole. The idea spreads. Hammer taps begin in the distance, their source unclear at first. Those taps do not yet define the night. The walking does. Still, the taps signal a new posture toward the concrete. Not fear, not reverence, but testing. The air grows colder, breath fogs. The plazas near the border fill with songs that require no rehearsal. The hour advances toward midnight. The authorities continue to call for calm, which is granted. Calm tonight means motion rather than silence. A record kept at the checkpoint, likely a brief sheet clipped to a board, contains the only phrase needed to describe what is happening: heavy flow. We follow that flow toward a broader view, where the wall itself becomes a platform rather than a border. The scene at the first crossing grows denser by the minute, and the physical details matter because they explain the pace of what follows. Lamps cast a white sheen over wet asphalt. Painted lines point travelers toward booths designed for deliberate processing. Metal rails create channels that rarely hold more than a few dozen people at once. Tonight, those channels overflow. Families stand together even when no official has told them to form lines. Anxious hands fold paperwork that may or may not be required. Some hold small overnight bags, a signal that they expect to return if told to do so. Others carry nothing at all and seem intent on simply proving that a step across is possible. The uniformed guards at the booths are trained for clear instructions, and the evening is defined by the opposite. Telephones ring. The men inside the glass cabins take notes on thin paper that smudges under their gloves. They repeat phrases that sound careful rather than consistent, suggesting that interpretation has replaced procedure. A short, widely shared press remark from earlier in the day is quoted and misquoted by both sides of the barrier, and its vagueness spreads faster than it can be corrected. Travelers cite it as if it were an open passage. Guards cite it as if it required formal approval not yet given. The difference produces a stalemate, and with each minute, the stalemate looks less sustainable. A small group chants steadily for the gate to open. The chant is not loud enough to be called a protest, yet not quiet enough to be ignored. The mood feels calm but compacted, like air building behind a closed door. Some in the crowd argue that the safest way is to wait until morning. Others say the opportunity may vanish by morning. Nearby apartments empty onto the sidewalks as residents wander down to watch. A child sits on a parent's shoulders to see the front. Street vendors, sensing an unusual night, offer warm snacks that steady the hands of those who have been standing for hours. Across the line, a cluster of onlookers from the other side of the city gathers to mirror the scene. They wave, a gesture that has no legal value but carries emotional weight. The guards huddle. Their conversation has an anxious rhythm that carries beyond the glass. A younger officer appears to argue for a cautious test. Let a few pass and observe the effect. An older colleague warns that an uncontrolled crowd could surge. The telephone rings again. No clear directive arrives. A ledger on the counter, one of those routine border logs that track crossings and exceptions, sits open to a blank page for the hour. It will not remain blank for long. This impasse fosters a shared conclusion. If the top cannot decide, the street will decide by simple presence. People inch forward by the width of a coat sleeve. They do not push, they lean. The guards look over the heads and see a tide that now fills the street beyond view. A barrier swings inward by a small degree, so an officer can better address the front row. And that narrow motion is misread as permission by those 3 rows back. The shift becomes gentle pressure. Voices rise but do not turn sharp. The officers signal for patience, but the hand signals resemble a welcome. The small barrier cannot move further without admitting someone, and to swing it back would mean to strike the people closest to it. That is a line few here wish to cross. A compromise appears in the open air. Allow a handful through for verification at the far table, and keep notes to justify the decision to superiors later. The crowd senses the possibility and holds steady, ready to step without shoving. When the chain unlatches with a plain clack, the sound feels louder than it is. It is the practical sound of metal. It also seems to those within earshot like the start of a different night. We remain with the first cluster as they move under the lamps, while a copy of the evening press statement lies folded in a coat pocket, to see what happens when permission and momentum meet the far side. Climbing begins at low sections where support structures form accidental steps, then advances to taller spans where willing hands form ladders from coats and shoulders. Those who reach the top stand with careful balance at first, feet spread, hands out for others. They look not for confrontation, but for orientation, as if a rooftop city map had been rolled out for the first time. Flags appear, not banners of institutions, but cloth from homes, small and personal. A rhythm develops without a conductor. People tap at the concrete with tools picked up from workbenches or borrowed from friends, and they trade places so that many can say they have touched it. Chips fall to soft applause. The top of the wall is not spacious, yet it becomes a square where strangers nod and exchange short phrases that carry through the cold. Television crews arrive with lights that turn the night into a pale noon near the most crowded spans. The presence of cameras appears to restrain the heavy hand that might otherwise descend. It also spreads the images along transmission lines that reach cafes and dormitories across the city by the hour. Those who had stayed home decide there is something to witness and join. On the ground, police and soldiers watch with a blend of concern and endurance, aware that any attempt to clear the top would require strength and certainty they do not hold tonight. Nearby, a stack of papers, perhaps the evening's internal guidance and a transcript of the earlier press remark, sits unused, its clear language defeated by the scale of attendance. For many participants, the emotional center is not the breakage, but the proximity. To stand where one could not stand yesterday changes the measure of every daily errand that had been planned around a barrier. The improvisation of the moment becomes a civic lesson in public space. People discover how to keep each other safe on a narrow ledge, how to share tools, how to pass fragments down without crowding the edge. A man with a thermos pours small cups for those whose hands shake. A group clears a path up and down from the top and assigns lookouts to warn if the flow turns unsafe. The task is not formalized. It emerges because needs are visible and the night is long. From elsewhere in the city, musical notes drift in and settle like signals that say the old schedule no longer controls the clock. Streetcars slow rather than stop. Conductors wave. A parked truck becomes a stage for a brief speech about patience and care. No promises are made. The speaker's voice cracks from cold. People clap because the words feel calm. A few attempt to carve letters into the surface, then abandon the effort when they see it draws attention to one person over many. The preferred souvenir of the night becomes the unlettered chip of concrete, a piece without any claim attached. Meanwhile, reports circulate that additional checkpoints have adopted the same posture as the first. The phrase used by witnesses to describe the pattern is consistent, not ordered, allowed. That word suits the temperature of the night. Allowed implies tolerance rather than declaration, a window rather than a door. The scale of the crowd transforms this allowance into a broader fact. The symbolism of the concrete is now subordinate to the experience of movement across it. Some question whether the structure might be sealed again by morning, and they choose to remain through the dark hours to be present if enforcement returns. Others, tired and satisfied, walk home along streets that feel longer because they are open. An officer makes one more call, asks for clarity, and is told to maintain calm. He reads the line as permission to continue doing what he is doing, standing watch without stopping what he cannot stop. In a nearby office, a clipped radio bulletin summarizes the situation like a weather report. It is neither triumphant nor fearful. It lists the crossings, notes the crowds, and urges care. The announcer signs off with a time that places the city well past midnight. On the wall, the tapping slows as hands grow cold, but the flow at street level keeps steady, guided now by volunteers who mark safe paths with gestures and lanterns. We hold on this balance point, concrete underfoot, lights in the distance, a sense that the night has converted barriers into routes, before tracing how the rest of the city's apparatus responds when dawn edges toward the line and official schedules resume. Dawn approaches with a thin line of gray along the eastern rooftops, and the crossings keep moving even as the night's crowded urgency softens into the steadier pace of morning. Lamps click off one by one, replaced by a flat sky that makes the concrete look less dramatic and, in its way, more ordinary. The officers on night duty trade places with colleagues who slept fitfully, aware that their shift will not resemble any previous morning at the line. A makeshift rota lies on a clipboard, smudged by damp fingers, showing names that have been crossed out and rewritten as men returned from their posts to fetch warm drinks, and were sent back again because the flow did not slow. The people arriving at this hour differ from those of midnight. They are workers heading to early shifts, parents with toddlers who woke too soon, and neighbors who avoided the cold but will not miss the proof. Many carry nothing. Some bring small parcels as tokens for relatives across the boundary. In this light, the behaviors of both sides have settled into a pattern that appears unplanned yet functional. A path is marked by rope and chalk from the curb to the open gate, the sort of line usually used for festivals and markets. Volunteers in heavy coats stand at corners, directing newcomers toward safer approaches and reminding them to mind the curb. The guardroom window is propped open for airflow and carried voices. A kettle rattles on a hot plate, paper cups stack high. Across the street, a row of bakery windows brightens as ovens finish their work. The smell creeps into the queue, softening tense shoulders and filling brief pauses with something familiar. The first morning deliveries arrive, drivers stepping from their cabs to ask how late the lanes ran. The answer is that they did not stop. A few sections of the wall wear fresh scars where the night's tapping had been energetic. Larger tools now appear, not all of them suitable for the material, but the effort continues in small cycles, with frequent pauses for safety and rest. The noise is intermittent and oddly respectful. No ceremony opens the day, yet its tone feels shaped by mutual restraint. The two sides of the street meet in minor acts of help. A west side pedestrian holds a hand while someone steps down from the top. An east side passer helps an older man fold a coat into a pillow to sit on a low ledge. The presence of television equipment remains a factor. Cables snake along the pavement to small vans where tired producers compare notes and wait for updated bulletins. Short segments recorded before sunrise are replayed in morning broadcasts, and those segments serve as unofficial guidance because they show officers allowing movement. A simple phrase in a morning radio roundup, "Crossings continue, no incidents reported," functions as an indicator that higher offices, if they object, have not yet said so in words that change behavior. Meanwhile, the paperwork evolves to match reality. The border ledger, which had stood as a symbol of control, becomes a record of accommodation. Entries note heavy traffic, polite demeanor, and occasional fainting due to cold. The ledger is practical because it may be needed later to explain choices. It is also a trace of an institution learning hour by hour a different role. A second ledger is started to track requests for assistance, missing persons, medical help, and items misplaced in the crush. A volunteer group forms around that page and pins handwritten notices to a board near the guardroom door. The board fills quickly with names and meeting spots. A bicycle courier darts between crossings to share useful details, like where the surface is less slick or where steps are steadier. City workers arrive with sand to treat icy patches and, without instruction from any visible official, begin to spread it along the new path. Their orange vests draw nods of thanks, and they work with the economy of people used to early streets. The cumulative effect is that morning looks like an improvised civic project rather than a standoff. There remains a strand of uncertainty that neither side can ignore. If a firm directive arrives, routines could tighten. If a senior figure appears, the posture could change. Yet the hours pass and only soft instructions are heard. Keep order, avoid harm, maintain calm. The phrase maintains calm recurs in several brief notes pinned inside the guard station, likely copied from a higher office and distributed by phone. Those notes do not specify stopping or reversing the flow, and so the flow continues. School children on the west side, walking with parents, pause to watch and ask quiet questions that no one answers in detail. A group of factory workers from the east, off shift and giddy with fatigue, cross to buy hot drinks and then return, their faces flushed. A man in a worn coat stands at the border of the crowd and looks at the wall for a long time without moving closer. He seems to be measuring his years against its height. At some crossings, dignitaries or party officials are rumored to be on their way, yet they do not arrive while the morning hours tilt toward midday. The city's practical systems adapt in small increments. Transit timetables flex, street cleaning schedules are missed and rescheduled, phone lines hum. A local bureau issues a brief bulletin that lists open crossings and suggests staggered visits to avoid crowding, an understated attempt at traffic management that doubles as acknowledgement. In this middle light, the city does not look transformed. It looks lived in, with a new seam opened and carefully stitched by hands on both sides. Before the noon hour, with sun diffused through cloud, a meeting in a nearby administrative building gathers senior staff to review the situation. But the people at the crossings cannot see the agenda. What they see is a set of small, repeatable actions. Step forward, show a paper, nod, walk, that carry them through. We remain at curb level as a runner arrives with a copy of the day's first news sheet and a rumor of an afternoon briefing, to follow the words on paper as they try to catch up with what the feet have already established. By late morning, office corridors near the central square grow busy with footsteps that echo the crossings. But here the rhythm is clipped by doors and stairwells and the habit of meetings. Secretaries stack folders that hold drafts of statements, while clerks trade notes about how to categorize what is happening without committing to a label that could be contradicted. A dozen telephones ring across 2 floors, each carrying a version of the same question put in careful terms that avoid finality. Should the lanes remain as they are? The word remain is used to imply passivity rather than approval. It allows the day to proceed while leaving room for later edits to memory. A small drafting room becomes the center of a document that lists points for an afternoon press appearance. The draft cites public safety, orderly conduct, and the need to avoid injury. It does not mention invitation. The absence matters. In a side office, a plain folder marked Schedules contains an index card with times for possible briefings, and that card acquires penciled note marks as meeting slip. Down the hall, a liaison officer meets with city services about transit. They agree to extend certain lines into the evening to handle the crowds near the border. That practical choice has symbolic weight, though the minutes couch it as an operational measure. 2 credible indicators emerge from this corridor work: a posted timetable update for trams that lists later departures, and a short internal circular that instructs municipal workers to prioritize lighting repairs near the crossings. Those artifacts do not argue for or against the situation. They acknowledge it in the language of maintenance. Across the city, workplaces adapt their own calendars. Factories excuse late arrivals with a shrug. Shops near the line remain open, while owners step outside every few minutes to look toward the flow. A bank manager stands in his doorway with a small notebook, counting people by the dozen as a way to frame a story for his family at supper. A group of teachers holds class in a nearby park because half the students have not returned from the morning's walk to the border. Newspapers roll off presses with headlines that balance the edge between calm and change. Editors choose verbs that hedge, eases, opens, allows. The editorial staff keeps the layout flexible in case a firm pronouncement arrives, but by early afternoon it has not, and the evening edition plans a series of photographs that require no heavy text. In the radio building, producers line up linked interviews with residents from both sides who describe what they saw, carefully trimming away policy comments that might be premature. One producer finds a veteran tram conductor who has run a line along the border for years. The conductor describes the morning as the first time traffic paused for people who were allowed to pause. His line is replayed because it frames the day as adjusted routine. On the ground near the crossings, the pace lifts again as those freed from offices join the movement. There is less uncertainty now, not because a decree has clarified matters, but because repetition has built trust. People have seen others cross and return, and so they do so as well. The volunteer rosters thicken. A medic team appears with basic supplies and a quiet table where they check on those who have stood too long. They work under a sign that reads "Rest," which is the most neutral word they could choose. A municipal notice board near a busy gate carries a simple sheet stamped with the city's seal. Avoid crowding, keep lanes clear, assist the elderly. It is a line of text that could fit any large gathering. Here it functions as a passive blessing. Across town, a meeting in a diplomatic office considers how to phrase statements for foreign desks. The officers decide to quote the earlier ambiguous remarks and add a promise of public order. They do not venture further. Their caution filters through wire services as a sentence that says little, yet confirms much. Cross-border movement is being managed with care. That choice steadies the mood in neighborhoods that had worried about confrontation. Supplies reach the crossings more reliably. Cafes coordinate with volunteers to deliver urns of tea and trays of bread. Donation jars appear on counters with signs that simply say, "For the helpers." An unspoken agreement emerges to rotate voices at impromptu stages so that no one person becomes a figurehead for what is a many-handed night and day. A local museum quietly opens its courtyard as a rest point with benches and water. Its curator later records the gesture in a brief note to city archives so that the memory does not dissolve when the courtyard returns to silence. The city's sound now mixes conversation, distant music, and the soft grind of tram wheels. The wall remains, yet it is no longer a single-purpose object. It holds tourists, volunteers, and an unending chain of fragments that pass down like river stones to pockets and shelves. As afternoon slopes toward evening, the light warms. Street lights blink on once more, but their effect is gentler than the previous night because the path is known. There is talk of a more formal address before midnight, though no time is set. People accept the absence of schedule because their feet already hold the rule of the day. Walk where you wish and return if you choose. We leave the corridors and the notice boards to rejoin the evening streets, where gatherings swell into organized celebration without losing the care that kept the lanes safe, and where music and measured announcements share the same air. The second evening begins with a tone that borrows from the first, yet settles into something more deliberate. Near the most famous spans, platforms rise from trucks and wooden pallets and small bands take turns offering steady rhythms that people can hum while they move. The lighting is brighter and more even than the night before, because municipal crews have replaced bulbs along key approaches and set temporary lamps on poles, guided by an afternoon circular that prioritized these blocks. That circular, along with updated tram timetables posted at stops with stamped times that push into the late night, serve as two clear signals that the city intends to shepherd rather than suppress the gatherings. Volunteers now wear armbands cut from cloth to help people find assistance. They direct foot traffic as if guiding a procession, reminding strangers to keep clear paths for those who wish to cross and recross. The pace is easy and the mood is steady. Laughter does not drown out the careful, unspoken discipline that has defined these hours. Along the wall's base, a series of shallow steps, earlier scuffed by climbing boots, are reinforced with planks to reduce slips. A folding table operates as a lost and found. The ledger from the guard room, earlier filled with irregular entries, has a companion book that logs items returned, scarves, gloves, a family photograph that drew applause when a young man recognized it and held it up. People call out directions and names when they spot someone searching. A civic rhythm has evolved into what feels like a newfound ritual. Approach, assist, ascend, observe, descend, and make room. Drones are not in the sky. The era knows nothing of that view. The vantage that matters is the top of the concrete, where those who climb still balance carefully and make space for others to stand and turn slowly to see streets they could once only imagine. The wall itself continues to shed small fragments. The work is not a siege. It is a slow attrition applied by many hands over many hours, with pauses for songs and for tea. A choir forms at one corner, singing familiar tunes in plain voices. No one leads it, yet it holds together as new singers join in. Across the way, a flatbed truck becomes a speaking platform for short remarks about patience and safety. The words are simple and practical. Watch your step, hold the rail, share your tools, take turns. They are not slogans. They are instructions for preserving the very thing that has arrived. Officers maintain presence at a distance that allows them to observe without provoking. When they do step forward, it is to help lift someone down or to clear a path for a stretcher when fatigue overcomes a participant. The collaboration feels matter-of-fact. The old posture is not forgotten, but it is not summoned. Very late in the evening, a brief statement is read from a low podium set up for the purpose. It is written in administrative language that names public order, acknowledges high attendance, and asks for calm conduct. The phrasing avoids triumph and condemnation. It functions as a minimal frame within which the city is already moving. Over the course of the night, small lit windows on both sides display gatherings in apartments where families host relatives and friends, comparing notes and making plans to visit places long discussed in letters. Street level, merchants extend hours, not to sell much, but to offer shelter from the cold. A cafe near the most crowded span becomes a de facto information point where volunteers update a handwritten map of safer stairways and less crowded blocks. The map proves useful when a new wave arrives after the final evening tram pulls in, with additional passengers carried free by the conductor's choice and later covered by the posted timetable revision. The fragments of concrete collected this night are smaller because the most accessible edges have already been tapped. People accept this without complaint because the souvenir is not the point. Being present is the point, and a student sketches the scene as a way to keep still in the press of motion. A retiree stands at a corner handing out slices of bread until his basket is empty. A quiet man in a worn coat from the previous morning finally climbs the steps with help, stands at the top for a minute, and descends. He does not speak. The ritual accommodates silence as easily as song. Near midnight, fog lifts and reveals clear stars. The wall's angles stand sharp against the sky. The platform's quiet. The choir's voice is lower. People begin to drift toward home with the unhurried stride of citizens who feel that tomorrow will resemble tonight in the ways that matter. A municipal truck rolls by with a small crew that checks lamp covers and gathers discarded cups. They leave the chalk lines in place. That choice, like many others in these hours, is a small acknowledgement that the path belongs to use rather than decree. A final bulletin on the hour notes continued crossings, safe conditions, and the prospect of more structured guidance in the coming days. It does not instruct anyone to stop. In this softened silence, the wall feels less like a sentence than like a page about to be turned. We hold on that page as night tips into a second dawn, carrying us toward a closing note that weighs the uncertainty without trying to settle it, and listens for the questions that will linger when the crowd thins. Morning returns to Berlin with a steadier light and a city that moves along routes once forbidden, and it is here that the story pauses without closing. The hours behind us show how a line of concrete can be undone by repeated, careful motion, and how an institution can reinterpret its purpose when clarity does not arrive from above. Public records from these days may list operational choices rather than declarations, and field notes may highlight how crowds behaved with a discipline that reduced risk without formal command. The night's images will travel beyond the city, yet their meaning will depend on what later documents decide to say. Was this the outcome of misread remarks at a press table? The product of administrative caution that left space for ordinary insistence, or a convergence of many small decisions that seemed minor alone and decisive together? The ledgers at the checkpoints and the schedule changes for trams record a logic of accommodation, and they will sit beside testimony that speaks to relief felt on side streets far from microphones. These pages cannot choose between them. They can only present the pattern as it appears: gates unlatched, lanes managed, fragments passed from hand to hand. The wall remains in place, yet its function has shifted enough to make its old purpose uncertain. What follows may be formal statements, redesigned maps, or the gradual acceptance that last night's route is today's routine. The questions that persist are not loud, but they are durable. Who first decided that allowing a handful through would be safer than turning them back? When did a note about keeping calm become permission to cross and return? How long will the chalk lines stay on the pavement before someone calls them permanent? We step out of the frame with those questions. The city remains breathing at an ordinary pace, waiting for the next hour's briefing to either reinforce what people already know in their feet, or to suggest a new path that will need to be tested again by walking.